Disclaimer. This video presents a story based on real events. To protect the privacy of the people involved, names, locations, and certain details have been changed or altered. Some scenes may be slightly adapted for storytelling purposes, but the core events and situations are inspired by real experiences. It was a quiet evening. The kind of evening that tricks you into believing your life is stable. Our house stood on the outskirts of Colorado Springs, where the neighborhoods grow quieter with every mile away from downtown. Out there, the streets empty early, porch lights glow like small islands in the dark, and the wind moves slowly through the trees as if time itself has decided to slow down. For 12 years, that house had been my entire world. Not because it was perfect, because I had built my life around it. 4 of us sat at the dinner table that evening. My wife, Megan, her 2 daughters from her first marriage, Ashley and Lauren, and me. 12 years earlier, the girls had been teenagers when Megan and I married. Teenagers with sharp edges, quiet resentment, and memories of a father who still existed somewhere out there in the world, but never quite existed inside the daily reality of the house. I never tried to replace him. Men who try to force themselves into that role usually fail. You can't overwrite blood with effort. You can only try to stand nearby long enough that people stop noticing the difference. So I never asked them to call me Dad. Never corrected them when they introduced me as my mom's husband. Never tried to compete with the ghost of their biological father who drifted in and out of their lives like a visiting holiday. Instead, I became something else. The quiet infrastructure of the family. The man who fixed things, paid things, handled things. For 12 years, money left my accounts the way electricity flows through the wires of a house. Invisible but essential. The mortgage, groceries, insurance, school costs. The kind of expenses that never receive applause because they are expected, not celebrated. Ashley's car when she turned 18. Lauren's private tutoring during her last year of high school. Summer programs. Doctor visits. Laptop replacements. College deposits. None of it felt dramatic at the time. It just felt like what a man does when he decides to carry a household on his back. And I carried it willingly. Dinner that night looked ordinary. Pasta steaming on the plates. Salad in the center of the table. A bottle of wine Megan had opened halfway through cooking. Ashley talked about her classes. Lauren mentioned a weekend trip she and her friends were planning. I listened the way I had listened for 12 years. Quietly, carefully, trying to stay involved without stepping into territory that didn't fully belong to me. For a long time, I believed that patience eventually earns acceptance. That if you show up enough times, people eventually stop seeing you as an outsider. Maybe that belief was the biggest mistake I ever made. Halfway through dinner, Megan set her wine glass down on the table. The sound was small, just a soft tap against wood. But something about the way she placed it there made the air change. She looked at me, not angry, not emotional, calm, businesslike. You are no longer involved in decisions about the kids. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood her. 12 years of shared life creates habits in your brain. You expect conversations to move gradually, not collapse suddenly into declarations. Ashley and Lauren exchanged a quick glance across the table. The kind of glance people share when something has already been discussed beforehand. Ashley nodded slightly. Lauren followed a second later. Then Ashley spoke. It'll just be easier for everyone. Easier. That word echoed inside my chest like something hollow. I looked at each of them in turn. Megan, Ashley, Lauren. 3 faces that had shaped the last 12 years of my life. 3 people I had quietly supported while asking for very little in return. And suddenly the structure I had built my life around shifted. Not dramatically, not violently, just enough to reveal the truth hiding underneath it. I wasn't part of the foundation. I was part of the scaffolding, useful during construction, removable once the building was standing. The strange thing is that I didn't feel anger, at least not at first. What I felt was something colder, clarity. I didn't argue, didn't remind them who had paid for the college applications sitting in Lauren's bedroom drawer, didn't point out that Ashley's car outside had been purchased with my savings. Didn't ask Megan when exactly she had decided I was no longer allowed to participate in decisions about the very lives I had spent more than a decade financing. I simply continued eating. Pasta, salad, water, The food tasted different now. Not bad, just distant. Like something happening in a room I wasn't fully inside anymore. No one spoke. Ashley avoided my eyes. Lauren stared at her plate. Megan sipped her wine slowly, as if waiting for a reaction that never came. When I finished my meal, I folded my napkin carefully and placed it beside my plate. "Thank you for the evening," I said. That sentence surprised them. I could see it in their faces. They had expected resistance. Maybe an argument. Maybe anger. Instead they got politeness. I stood up, grabbed my keys, walked to the front door. No one stopped me. Outside the air felt cooler than it had an hour earlier. The quiet street stretched in both directions under the soft glow of streetlights. The kind of quiet neighborhood where people assume every house contains a stable family. Appearances are powerful things. I got into my car and closed the door. For a while I didn't start the engine. The silence inside the vehicle felt heavier than the silence at the dinner table. 12 years of memories sat there with me. School graduations, late-night hospital visits, long work weeks followed by grocery runs on Sundays. All the quiet responsibilities that build a household brick by brick. And then Megan's sentence replayed in my mind. "You are no longer involved in decisions about the kids." The sentence had been clear, simple, direct. I reached for my phone and opened my banking app. The screen lit up the dark interior of the car. A list of automatic payments appeared. College tuition, $2,400. Health insurance, $1,150. Car loan, $620. Phone plans, $180. Private tutoring, $300. For years those numbers had been background noise in my life. Just another set of responsibilities handled quietly each month. Tonight they looked different. Tonight they looked like something else. Obligations tied to a role I had just been told I no longer possessed. I stared at the list for a long moment. The street outside remained empty. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Then I pressed the first button. Cancel Autopay. Confirm. One line disappeared. Then another. Cancel Autopay. Confirm. Cancel Autopay. Confirm. No anger. No speeches. No dramatic gestures. Just a few quiet taps on a glowing screen. 20 minutes passed like that. When the final payment vanished, the car felt strangely lighter. Like something invisible had finally been lifted from my shoulders. I closed the app, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. Inside the house behind me, dinner plates were probably still sitting on the table. 3 people were probably still trying to understand why I hadn't argued. They would understand soon enough. Because sometimes the loudest response a man can give is silence followed by action. And sometimes the strongest decision a man can make is simply to accept exactly what he has been told. You are no longer involved. So I wasn't. Not anymore. I was halfway down the highway when the first vibration probably hit Megan's phone. I didn't see it. But after 12 years of living in that house, you learn to imagine how things unfold inside its walls even when you're miles away. The kitchen table was probably still messy. Plates pushed aside. Half-empty wine glasses standing like quiet witnesses to a conversation that had ended badly. Ashley might have been the first to notice something. She was always the practical one. Maybe she opened her laptop. Maybe she checked the payment portal the university used for tuition. Maybe it was just habit, a quick glance at finances before the weekend. And then she would have seen it. Payment failed. College tuition, $2,400. Cancelled. At first she probably assumed it was a technical error. Bank's glitch. Systems delay. She might have refreshed the page. Logged out. Logged back in. The message wouldn't change. Meanwhile, Lauren might have been upstairs in her room when her own notification arrived. Insurance autopay removed. For a moment she probably stared at the screen the way people stare at a message written in a language they don't recognize. Then the second notification would appear. Car loan payment cancelled. Phone plan autopay removed. One message after another. The quiet kitchen that had hosted our dinner would slowly fill with the low electronic buzz of alerts. I imagined Megan standing there in the center of the room, holding her phone, watching the notifications stack up faster than she could read them. At first confusion, then concern, then the slow realization that something deliberate was happening. Lauren would text first. "Mom, why did the insurance payment fail?" Ashley would follow seconds later. "The bank says the car loan didn't go through." Another message. "Did you change something with the accounts?" Megan would probably answer the same way people answer when they don't yet understand the situation. "I'm checking." But while she typed that message, another notification would appear. Autopay removed. And beside every payment line was a name. My name. That's when the pattern would become impossible to ignore. Payments disappearing, one after another, like lights switching off in different rooms of a house. The silence inside the kitchen would feel heavier now. Ashley would look up from her phone. Lauren would step closer to the table. And Megan would already know, because even before she called me, she understood exactly what had happened. I imagined the moment she scrolled through the banking notifications, her eyes slowing down, her breathing changing, her mind replaying the sentence she had spoken only an hour earlier. "You are no longer involved in decisions about the kids." People often forget that words have consequences. Not emotional consequences, practical ones. Money, responsibility, support. When Megan finally called, I was still driving. The highway stretched ahead of me like a dark ribbon under the headlights. Her name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello." Her voice sounded controlled. Too controlled. "Did you change something with the payments?" There was no accusation in her tone yet. Only tension. "Yes," I said. Pause followed. The kind of pause where a person hopes the explanation will soften what they already suspect. "Why would you do that?" she asked. I slowed the car slightly, watching the road ahead. "You said I'm no longer involved in decisions about the kids." Silence. For several seconds she didn't respond. I could almost hear the thoughts moving through her mind, searching for a version of reality where those words didn't mean what they obviously meant. "That's not what I meant," she finally said. Her voice had changed now, less controlled, more defensive. It sounded exactly like that. Another pause. Then she sighed. "You're overreacting." The word hung in the air between us. Overreacting. It's an interesting word. People use it when they realize a situation is slipping outside their control, but they still want to pretend everything is normal. "You told me I'm not involved," I said calmly. "So I'm not." Her breathing grew sharper. "That's not how families work." I almost smiled at that. For 12 years our family had worked exactly one way. Paid. They decided. And no one questioned the arrangement because it was comfortable. Now the arrangement had changed. Suddenly the system felt broken. "The bills won't disappear," Megan said quietly. There it was. The first honest sentence of the entire evening. "No," I replied. "They won't." She didn't answer, because for the first time in years the financial structure of the household was visible. The invisible support had become visible absence. Ashley's car payment, Lauren's insurance, university tuition, phone plans. All the quiet expenses that had been handled automatically for years were now standing in the middle of the room like unpaid debts demanding attention. "Are you seriously doing this?" Megan asked finally. Her voice carried something new now. Not anger, worry. "Yes." Another silence. Longer this time. Then she spoke more softly. "We need to talk about this." "We already did." "Megan." But she stopped herself before finishing the sentence. Because she realized something important. The conversation at the dinner table had already defined my role. She had drawn the line. I had simply stepped back from it. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. "No," I answered. "I'm making it accurate." When I hung up the phone, the highway was empty again. Behind me, in that quiet house on the edge of Colorado Springs, 3 people were probably sitting around the same table where dinner had been served an hour earlier. Only now the table looked different. Not because the plates had changed, because the reality had. For 12 years the system had worked silently. Money left my account. Bills were paid. Life moved forward. Now the system had been switched off. and the phones in that house were still vibrating. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. Not calm, exactly, more like a low, persistent hum of tension vibrating through the house. Silence became a presence in itself, one that pressed down on Megan, Ashley, and Lauren, and made the air feel heavier in every room. I stayed mostly out of sight, retreating to my office with the door closed, letting the consequences I had triggered unfold on their own. I didn't need to witness their panic to know it existed. 12 years of living in that house had taught me the rhythm of this family, the way anxiety spreads, how worry travels faster than words. By mid-morning, Ashley discovered that her car payment had been declined. Her text to Megan was clipped and nervous. "Mom, the bank says my loan didn't go through. What's happening?" Lauren's tuition payment soon followed, and her university sent a curt, impersonal email demanding immediate payment. Even the insurance company chimed in, threatening to suspend coverage if the overdue bills weren't addressed. These were the things I had carried silently for years, the obligations that never felt like mine, because I always considered them part of the responsibility I had chosen to shoulder. But now they had returned to the surface, stark, undeniable, and with consequences that no one could ignore. Megan appeared at my office door a few days later. She looked drained, her eyes carrying a mix of exhaustion, frustration, and guilt. I could see her lips quiver before she spoke. "Why didn't you tell me you were paying for all of that?" she asked. Her voice sounded fragile, almost accusatory. I didn't rise from my chair. I kept my gaze on her. "I did," I said. "Many times. You just didn't think it mattered." She sank slowly into the chair across from me. For a moment, the silence between us was thick and unbearable. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't apologize. What could I say? That for 12 years, the invisible work I had done had been ignored? That the gratitude I had imagined would come someday never arrived? Ashley and Lauren had *N noticing the pattern too. They saw now the lifeline they had taken for granted. Every expense I had quietly absorbed was now looming over them, an unfamiliar weight that couldn't be ignored. College tuition, car payments, medical coverage. The bills I had once made disappear were staring them in the face, unrelenting and unapologetic. Lauren's voice trembled when she finally approached me. I didn't realize this much." She didn't finish the sentence. The hesitation hung there, a mixture of shame and disbelief. Ashley was harder. She was angry at first, not at me, not exactly. More at the world she thought she understood. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" she asked, gesturing vaguely at the stack of notices piling up on her desk. "Why didn't Mom? Why didn't you?" "Because no one asked," I said softly. "Because no one wanted to know. Because you've been living on my labor for years without ever thinking about it." The realization settled slowly. Over the next few days, tension replaced the casual ease that had always masked the undercurrent of unspoken obligations. Conversations became more urgent, hushed in fear of the next notice, the next overdue warning, the next unexpected consequence. The walls of the house seemed to grow narrower as the implications sank in. Megan tried to act quickly, making frantic phone calls, checking account balances, and attempting to stitch together a temporary solution. But the system had been disrupted, and she had no immediate way to reestablish the lifeline that had existed without question for over a decade. The bills didn't vanish because I had paused them. They were still there, waiting, indifferent to sentiment or history. Ashley learned to calculate exactly how much she would need to cover her car and related expenses. Lauren spoke to the university about delayed payment options, realizing for the first time that these conversations weren't theoretical, that deadlines were real and unforgiving. Megan had to manage the family's finances as a whole for the first time, seeing the fragile thread that had held everything together. I watched all of it unfold quietly, observing without comment. It was not revenge. It was not cruelty. It was reality. For 12 years I had absorbed the blows, the costs, the strain, and the debt. Now it was someone else's turn to carry them. And it was impossible for them to ignore the work I had done, the quiet infrastructure I had provided. For the first time, The girls understood what it cost to live the life they had always taken for granted. The first time Megan realized fully what I had done for the family. And for the first time they asked questions. Not about why I had stopped, not about punishment, but about how the system had worked before, how one person could quietly sustain so much without recognition. That knowledge hit them like a shockwave. It was uncomfortable, unsettling, and in some ways necessary. Respect does not come from awareness alone. Respect emerges when the illusion of ease collapses and the hard work beneath it becomes visible, unavoidable, undeniable. A week later, Megan finally sat down with me for a longer conversation. I see it now, she admitted. Her voice was subdued. I didn't know how much you were carrying. I said nothing. Sometimes, understanding arrives only when the consequences are real and palpable. No apology or explanation can replace that. Ashley and Lauren had started adjusting. Ashley found ways to manage her car payment herself. Lauren made arrangements for tuition and other expenses. Megan began managing the household finances in a way she had never had to before. Slowly, carefully, everyone started to operate within a system that now required them to acknowledge the costs of their choices. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't the kind of growth I would wish on anyone. But it was honest. For 12 years I had carried the family's weight silently. Now they were carrying it themselves, and in the process I finally realized the full impact of my own decisions. Because sometimes people understand your value not when you are helping, not when you are giving, but when you stop. The irony wasn't lost on me. I hadn't intended to punish anyone. I hadn't meant to make them suffer. I had only taken their words at face value. You are no longer involved. And I was not. Their anxiety, their panic, their scrambling to cover expenses. It wasn't the revenge I had imagined in private fantasies. It was a reflection, mirror clear, of how much I had been involved all those years. How many times I had smoothed the edges of life for them without recognition. How many nights I had sacrificed sleep to ensure the family could keep moving forward. I realized then that respect is only learned through experience. That love without acknowledgement is a fragile thing. That generosity without accountability can be a cage. And that sometimes the only way to teach these truths is to make them feel the absence of your presence. By the end of that week, the house had changed. Not in structure, not in walls or furniture, but in atmosphere. Conversations were more cautious, careful. Emails and bills were now met with attention and concern. Decisions had to be made deliberately. The illusions of effortless provision were gone. And slowly, a hard, silent understanding settled over the household. They could no longer ignore the work I had done. They could no longer pretend I was inconsequential. The consequences of my absence spoke louder than any words I might have offered. Because life, when the support you've silently provided disappears, becomes uncomfortably honest. No one thanked me. No one apologized. They simply began operating in a world that had previously existed only because I had carried it. And that was enough. Months passed, but the world inside the house had been permanently altered. The rhythm of life we had maintained for over a decade had broken, and what replaced it was stark, uncompromising, and painfully real. The auto payments I had canceled forced the household to confront realities it had never truly faced before. College tuition, car payments, insurance. These were no longer invisible responsibilities carried quietly by someone else. They were demands now, and everyone had to meet them on their own. Ashley adjusted first. She took a part-time job, long hours at a store she didn't like, but she earned her car payments herself. Each deposit into her bank account was a small but noticeable shift in her perspective. She discovered, reluctantly, that independence carried a price. The first time her paycheck cleared the debt on her car, I watched her expression change from irritation to a grudging respect. Not for me, necessarily, but for the reality she had ignored for years. Lauren followed. Transferring to a more affordable university was not the solution she had imagined. There were sacrifices. New roommates, longer commutes, fewer luxuries. A dorm that was functional but unremarkable. And yet, she learned what it meant to manage her own obligations, to feel the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. Tuition deadlines became personal deadlines. No one else could step in. The world became uncomfortably concrete, and she had to navigate it herself. Megan, too, changed. Initially, she had been frantic, exhausted from the sudden collapse of the financial scaffolding I had held in place for 12 years. She had pleaded, argued, begged me to resume payments, but I did not. I had made my point in the most concrete terms possible. My involvement had ended the moment she declared it irrelevant. Over time, she learned to calculate, budget, and plan. She saw now what I had been managing silently, year after year, and the weight of my absence forced her to engage with the household in a way she had never had to before. Occasionally, Ashley or Lauren would look at me with a flicker of understanding in their eyes. A glance across the table, a half-smile acknowledging, finally, that the stability they had taken for granted had been a product of deliberate action, quiet sacrifice, and endless labor. I didn't respond to these flickers. I didn't nod, didn't comment, didn't allow them the satisfaction of praise or thanks. Recognition was not the goal. Understanding was, and even that came slowly. There were moments of confrontation, naturally. Ashley would lash out at first, frustrated that her life had suddenly required effort she had never expected. Lauren would argue, complain, attempt to negotiate her way out of consequences she had ignored before. Megan would occasionally plead, trying to mediate, to smooth over the tension. But every time they returned to me, I remained steady, silent, immovable. The lessons were not about comfort. They were about reality. One evening, months after the first canceled payments, Megan spoke quietly. Her voice carried both remorse and a faint acknowledgement of what had been done all these years. "I think we didn't realize how much you were carrying," she admitted, almost as if confessing to herself rather than to me. I said nothing. Words were not necessary. Actions had already conveyed everything. Sometimes people understand your value not when you are helping, not when you are giving, but when you stop. Sometimes they only see the weight you bore once they feel it pressing against them. I had not intended punishment, I reminded myself. I had only acted on literal truth. Their words had created the circumstances. "You are no longer involved." I had responded accordingly. In the months that followed, subtle changes took root. Megan became more assertive in managing the household finances. Ashley's job demanded more responsibility, more organization, more accountability. Lauren adapted to her new college environment with a pragmatism she had lacked before. They were learning, finally, to operate in the absence of the invisible scaffolding I had provided for so long. I observed all of this from my own space, quietly, without interference. It was strange, watching the household grow into a structure I had once maintained. The tension of my absence was palpable but constructive. I did not intervene. I did not forgive. I did not absolve. Their progress was entirely theirs to earn. Occasionally, Megan would glance at me, her eyes betraying recognition, gratitude, perhaps even guilt. I never acknowledged it. This was not about restoring relationships. This was about exposing truths that had been long ignored. I had carried the weight silently for 12 years, and the world had continued as if my labor were inconsequential. Now they could see, and the realization could not be denied. Ashley and Lauren never thanked me directly. That was irrelevant. The lessons were internalized quietly without announcement. I saw the first hesitant moments of respect, the flickers of comprehension in their eyes. It was enough. Respect, after all, cannot be demanded. It must be earned or observed through necessity. I reflected often on the irony. For more than a decade, I had labored in silence, unacknowledged. Now, for the first time, my absence conveyed the magnitude of my involvement. It was a harsh lesson, delivered without ceremony, without confrontation. Just the quiet reality that I no longer participated in the life I had helped sustain. It was not revenge. It was not malice. It was moral clarity, the unadorned consequence of words spoken lightly at a dinner table. "You are no longer involved." I had taken those words literally. The result was inevitable. Sometimes the strongest decisions aren't loud. They don't come with arguments, speeches, or dramatic gestures. Sometimes the strongest decisions are quiet, almost imperceptible. A tap on a screen, a refusal to intervene, a step back from the weight you have borne so long. And yet the impact is devastating, because it forces the other person to see not what you do for them, but what you have done for them all along. Months later, Ashley's paycheck covered her car fully, on time. Lauren learned to navigate tuition deadlines independently. Megan budgeted with SK*LL she had never been required to exercise. Their lives adjusted to a reality I had once maintained silently. I never returned to being their provider. I never resumed payments. The household continued, altered, reshaped by consequences I had set in motion. And in that silence, I finally found my own. Because for 12 years, I had been invisible, indispensable, unappreciated. Now I existed outside of that, unburdened by the expectation that my labor should be unnoticed, unquestioned, or unacknowledged. And that, finally, was enough. The question remains, still, was I wrong? Was I cruel? Or was this the only way to reclaim myself from the prison of thankless devotion? Sometimes the only lessons that stick are the ones delivered by absence. Sometimes you learn the truth not when someone thanks you, but when they finally must survive without you. And sometimes the quietest action, the cessation of what you have always done, speaks louder than any speech, any confrontation, any tearful plea. I did not act out of anger. I did not act out of revenge. I acted out of clarity. I had been told where I belonged. I had responded in kind. The strongest actions are often the silent ones. The consequences were theirs to carry. And finally they were. Months passed, and the house remained quieter than it had been for years. Megan, Ashley, and Lauren adjusted to the new reality. Bills were paid differently now. Deadlines became personal responsibilities, and the illusion of effortless comfort dissolved entirely. I watched from a distance, never intervening, never forgiving or reminding them of the sacrifices I had made. Ashley grew self-reliant, managing her car and expenses without complaint. Lauren navigated college bureaucracy alone, learning lessons she would never forget. Megan became deliberate and accountable, handling the household finances with a precision that had been unnecessary before. I was still present, but differently. No longer the invisible backbone, no longer the man whose labor kept their lives afloat without acknowledgement. They felt the weight of what I had carried, and I finally felt the relief of existing outside the silent obligations that had defined me for 12 years. Sometimes respect is only learned through absence. Sometimes love is only understood through loss. I had given all I could and received little in return. Now, in quiet observation, I saw them grow into the reality I had once sustained. And for the first time in over a decade, I was free. The question remained, always, was I wrong? Or was this the only way to reclaim myself from thankless devotion? The silence that followed answered in its own way. The strongest lessons are the ones people must live, not the ones they are told. The ones they are told. The ones they are told. The ones they are told.